Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's parsha is Chukat, which is as much about water as it is about Chukim, or challenging rules. It starts with the death of Miriam and her well, segues into Moses' fatal sin in striking the water rock, and concludes with the Red Heifer and its purifying water. Today, we focus on the ability of sprinkled water or immersion into water to purify in Judaism and later in Christianity and maybe even today. So join us for Holy Water. Well, Rabbi, I am back in the U.S. of A. You are off to the Hamptons, the Sag Harbor this Shabbat by the water. My synagogue has many Shabbatot where they have Kabbalat Shabbat on the beach. The truth is that once my wife was away, and I knew that every Friday night I could go to the beach in my town of Westport, and there would be a congregation that would be having Kabbalat Shabbat on the beach. There's something about being on the water that makes Kabbalat Shabbat just a little bit more meaningful. And we're going to explore that kind of sense within me, which maybe is shared by you and by other people tonight. This powerful synergism of water with spirituality, with purification. So are we ready to go?
We're ready to go. Let's go.
We are in Chukat, and again, like I said in the intro, it starts with the death of Miriam, and the second that Miriam passes away, there's a water crisis, and all of the rabbinic commentaries connect the two and say that there was a well of Miriam that disappeared with her. And then we get into the story of Mei Meriva, the waters of dissonance, I would say, and then Moses has his fatal sin, the sin that stops him from going into the promised land. He's supposed to talk to the rock. It's really a water rock, as I said in the intro, and instead he hits it. And so there's water again. And then it segues into the laws of actually tumah, of impurity, which seem to be in Judaism all related to anything related to death. And it says as such in Numbers 19:14, it says, Zot haTorah Adam ki yamut ba'ohel. This is the law when a person dies in a tent. Whoever enters the tent and whoever is in the tent shall be impure 7 days, and every open vessel with no lid fastened down shall be impure. And in the open, anyone who touches a person who was killed or who died naturally, or human bone or a grave, shall be impure 7 days. Some of the ashes from the fire of purgation shall be taken. So I went to the chase, but in the prior verses, it talks about this red heifer who had to be pure red, who ultimately was sacrificed. His ashes were gathered, and they are sprinkled into water, and that's what we're referring to. Some of the ashes from the fire of purgation shall be taken for the impure person, and fresh water shall be added to them in a vessel. Another party who is pure shall take hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle on the tent and on all the vessels and people who were there, or on the one who touched the bones, or the person who killed or died naturally, or the grave. The pure person shall sprinkle it upon the impure person on the 3rd day, on the 7th day, thus purifying that person by the 7th. It talks about washing their clothes, and it goes on again, and it says, the water of lustration was not dashed on that person who is impure. That shall be for law for all time, and it goes on. And so in these verses, there's this sense of sprinkling, v'hizah hatahor al hatameh, and then it also talks about mei nidah. Now, we normally, when we think of nidah, we think of a woman in her menstrual cycle. But the truth is that the word mei nidah lo tizrak lo tomahu, it is really this water that is made for the impure. And I think the obvious connection is that when a woman goes into her monthly cycle, it's basically
she has to go to the mikvah,
well,
correct.
But it's basically because an egg, which has the potential of life, has passed.
Correct.
And so it seems to be all associated with potential life, with death. But that is the crux, I think, of Tumah, which we're not necessarily going to discuss tonight. But we are talking about this kind of capability of water. And we're not even talking about immersion. We're talking, as I said in the intro, about sprinkling. It uses the word hizah. It uses the word zorek, to throw. We don't really have a strong sense, a strong tradition, a strong vibe of sprinkling, do we? We do have immersion, but sprinkling doesn't seem to have survived the cut. What do you feel about that?
No, for sure not. I mean, the Torah does talk about sprinkling, like on Yom Kippur, the Kohen would sprinkle the blood on the altar. So we do have that idea of sprinkling. But you're right, it didn't make the cut, means we don't do it today. We still immerse, we don't sprinkle anymore. I mean, I would think that's because immersion is more, it's more significant than sprinkling.
And of course, you have here, in terms of, I was thinking about all of the other rituals associated with this kind of sprinkling of water, or even dipping into water, or even drinking water. You have the mei sotah. You have the woman who is questioned by her husband as lacking fidelity. She has words of the Torah, of God's name, that are put into the water, just like the ashes of the red heifer here are put into water, and there she has to drink it. I believe after the sin of the golden calf was ground up, and it was also
Correct.
a kind of test. The people who drank it, those who sinned, died, and those who were not guilty did not. So you have a little bit of that in terms of the grinding up. In Rashi, he makes the connection, and as always, Rashi is following the traditional interpretation of the rabbis. He talks about that they take unto themselves, just as they divested themselves of their golden earrings for making of the calf, of which was their own, so shall they bring the calf-like animal as an atonement for them, which is their own. And he goes, since they became defiled by a calf, let its mother come and atone for the calf. So he does make a connection between the red heifer and the golden calf.
Right.
And in a sense, almost like the Garden of Eden, this was the iconic sin of the Jewish people, and they're forever atoning for it. And, you could make the case that when death occurs, death as the personification of sin, somehow you need to get the ashes of this red heifer. But he does make that connection, which is kind of fascinating.
Well, it's a typical rabbinic thing, and that is, where does the red heifer come from, right? Where do you have such an idea? And so it must be connected to the other idea of an animal in the Torah. That's that's the golden calf, and it kind of plays one off the other. I think that's a very powerful Rashi.
In the introduction, I said that the name of the parsha is Chukat, and we've talked about this before. I mean, Chukat typically means there are some rules in the Torah that seem to be logical, that you can give a rationale for, and there are some that seem to be just like scratched onto a rock, a chok chakakti. There's no logic to them. And so you're absolutely right. Rashi and the rabbis are kind of like pulling straws here, trying to find out some significance or meaning from this very enigmatic law. But yes, and therefore it becomes a little bit like a Rorschach test where everybody projects a little bit of themselves. So, what do you really think type of thing? But Rashi and the rabbis he's quoting clearly see a connection to the other calf, the golden calf. It's interesting. I saw a Devar Torah from Kenneth Brander from Or Torah, and he quotes Brachot 63b, where Reish Lakish said, "From here it is derived," meaning from our pasuk it is derived, "that matters of Torah are only retained by one who kills himself over it, as it is said, this is the Torah when one who dies in a tent." So it's a real taking a pasuk out of context, but that ultimately is what we do when we look at the laws of the temple that is no more. And not only is it no more historically, you can almost make the case it's no more psychologically. It's not in our paradigm, so to speak. So when it says Zot Torah Adam ki yamot ba'ohel, so the rabbis go and say, when you study Torah, you have to think as though everybody is dead. You have to give up your life for it. And he goes on to say, and this is where I'll bring it into the present, he goes, this is a verse or a reference in the Talmud that those who believe that the Jews who are studying Torah don't have to go into the army use. And he goes, our contemporary reality as a sovereign state in Israel, this explanation is no longer pertinent. So what I'm trying to get out, we're not going to...
Oh, that's funny. That's what he says?
We're not going to linger here. We're not going to linger here. But the point is that this is a little bit of a Rorschach test, and somehow we need to make this powerful law of the Red Heifer and the purity that's embedded in it talk to us. And the rabbis did that then, and Rabbi Bender is engaged in the conversation today, and he says it no longer applies, and he makes an argument that you have to be in the army. But that's where we are. We're looking at something that's very ancient, and like many laws, the ancient days in the Torah, whether it's challah that we've talked about in the past, they have an afterlife. We still do challah, even though we don't live in the land of Israel.
Right.
We still do mikvah. So what we're going to spend the rest of the evening discussing is how, why, and what of this concept of sprinkling water, of the purity of water lasted, how it was reflected. And one of the things I want to make sure that we get into is because you are so engaged in conversions, I want you to jump in at any moment because you're seeing people who are literally being reborn, changing their lives by making that dip into that water. And whatever else any of us feel when we go into, whether it's a mikvah or we go into the ocean or maybe a swimming pool in our backyard, they've got to have an insight into what that moment felt like. So why don't we start now?
You want to start with that?
Yes, let's go ahead. What are some of the things that you've learned from your converts when they've gone in and come out of that mayim chayim, that water in the mikveh?
So they feel that going into the mikveh is a holy moment. Now, we make the point before they go into the mikveh that it's almost like magic. Before they go into the mikveh, they're not Jewish. They dunk in the mikveh, they immerse in the mikveh, and magically they're Jewish. So in a sense, it's magic water. And that's really very powerful to think about it. The truth of the matter is the same thing is true about a woman who goes to the mikveh every month. She's not allowed to be with her husband. She's not allowed in the time of the temple to go into the temple. She immerses in the mikveh, and magically she's allowed to go into the mikveh. And of course, the idea is that mikveh, and it's called mayim chayim, means live water, that water represents life. Water is flowing and water represents life. So it undoes impurity and it undoes a woman, that sense of impurity, and it means life. And in the case of a convert, it means we're giving you the life of a Jew, which is amazing. And I think that everyone in their own way appreciates it. Some of the converts, now the men aren't in the mikveh room, of course, with the women converts. So we have a special woman who goes in with them. But sometimes the converts want to spend some extra time by themselves after they immerse. They just want to be in the water. They want to spend some time in that moment. And you see also the power of that moment.
And, as I can only think about my daughter before she got married, was starting to do some shopping of what a mikveh was and where to go in New York City. And she actually got advice from a friend of hers who converted in New York City. And she said, you've got to go to this mikveh. It's wonderful. And when she called up, they said, are you a bride? And there were special days for the bride. They made it special. It is something. I think that mikveh is one of those traditions, and it's not sprinkling, but it is immersion in the water, that number one is a little bit stronger in the Orthodox community. It's been retained a little more in the Orthodox community. I think that, I always say, what are the ingredients of a typical Jewish community? You always have the Beit Knesset, you have the Gemach, the Free Loan Society, you have a mikveh. And I think that has been retained to their credit by the Orthodox community. I've read just in preparing today that there is a movement within conservatism and others.
Yeah, I was going to say what you just said is correct. In the past 5 years, there's been a movement in the more liberal branches of Judaism to bring back mikvah. That just makes your point stronger. And that's the sense that, they realize the power of water, the power of mikvah.
That's the very positive interpretation. Some of the negative interpretation that I've come across is where a conservative rabbi has trouble getting into an Orthodox mikveh.
Yeah, that's true also.
So
that's
we'll
correct.
see. There is always
also
politics involved. But before we get to the rabbinic sources, I want to quote Ezekiel 36, because in that he takes this sense of mikveh, this sense of water, to a new height that actually can make one understand where it went in the Dead Sea Scroll and the Essene community, where it went with Christianity and retained within Judaism. So in Ezekiel 36, it says, I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and you shall be purified. I will purify you from all your defilement and all your fetishes. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit into you. I will remove the heart of stone from your body and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit into you, and I will cause you to follow my laws and faithfully observe my rules. And obviously, he is addressing this not to an individual, but he is addressing this to Lebeit Yisrael, the house of Israel. V'zorakti aleichem mayim tahorim utahartem mikol tumotechem umikol gelululichem ataher etchem. So clearly, when we get to prophetic Judaism, they understood the power of the metaphor, and I have to admit there is a connection between what we're saying today and last week, where you were struck by the metaphor in Yael in Joel about pouring the Spirit, shivchi kamayim libech, this sense of water as a medium, of a spiritual medium that can transfer, that can give life, is very, very powerful. And Ezekiel, it clearly comes through.
Yeah, that's good. Shivchi kamayim libech. We pray for water. Water, when you take it out of mikveh for a second and you use it for rain, so water is what gives us life. Without rain, we can survive because there's no crops. That's why there's a special prayer that we recite on Shmini Atzeret. It's called Tfilat Geshem. If there's no rain in the winter, we're not going to be able to survive. That's related to water being life.
It's really a continuation of our conversation last week of Mashav HaRuach Umarid HaGashem.
Right? Isn't it right?
It's the especially in the Middle East, especially in where Israel was located, as opposed to Egypt, where you had a Nile. Here you were totally dependent on rain coming down. And at the end of the day, that's what Mayim Chayim is, correct? It's free rain coming down, not transferred through piping or whatever, but a direct from the source, so to speak.
And of course, we know that the mikvah has to be pure water, rainwater, river water, but it can't be, it can't be water that went through the pipes, because that's not water that's life. Life is from natural water.
So the next piece of Talmud that I want to quote is, I know from Lag BaOmer in the yeshiva. And in Lag BaOmer, there's a strong association with Rabbi Akiva, because, of course, Rabbi Akiva's students died from the plague, and that's why we have Sfirat HaOmer in terms of not shaving and other, not having weddings and stuff. But what they sing at the top of their lungs is the most famous song of Lag BaOmer, comes from the Mishnah in Yuma 85b, and it says, Amar Rabbi Akiva, how fortunate are you, Israel, before whom you are purified, and who purifies you. It is your Father in heaven, as it is stated, and I will sprinkle purifying waters upon you, and you shall be purified, quoting our verse in Ezekiel. And it says the ritual bath of Israel is God. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, lifnei mi ato matayren umi matayr etchem avichem shabashamayim. So what it does is it makes the parallel between the waters of the mikveh and God, him or herself, that Israel has this special, maybe on Yom Kippur, maybe other times, special connection that God is our mikveh. But in both Ezekiel and here, it definitely takes the concepts that we see in the sprinkling of the water in the mikveh and makes them into a metaphor for something much bigger and more profound. Isn't that amazing?
That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, that's just great. Mikvah and rain and natural water. It's beautiful how all this comes together. And of course, the second part of the parsha, there's no more water for the people, and that's a crisis. And that leads Moses to hit the rock and all of those things. But it's all related, isn't it?
It really, instead of being called Chukot, it definitely could be called Mayim. There's so many connecting links between what happens and water. It really struck me this year. In Kabbalat Shabbat, that we will hopefully all sing, maybe I will be singing it on the beach tomorrow night. We talk about Mikolot Mayim Rabim, Adira Mishperei Yam, Adir Ba'morom Hashem. The rivers has raised Adonai, the rivers have raised their voice, the rivers raise their raging waves. There's just a beautiful use of Mayim as a metaphor, which is wonderful. It gets back to Mekave Hamayim in creation. It's a very strong, powerful force. And of course, we have the Shivchi Kamayim Libech. I will pour out my heart like water in the presence of the Lord. And that is in Eicha. And we will be reading that in a few weeks in Lamentations on Tisha B'Av. So my point is that the Mayim aspect of the spirituality of purification is very, very strong in our texts. And I guess what I'm raising is a question then about how it is not more obvious. I guess from my background as a yeshiva bacher, I would wake up in the morning. I would, before my feet touched the ground, I would reach under my bed. I would take out a can of water that I had prepared the night before. I would wash my hands. It's called Nagelwasser. And I would follow the precept of washing my hands because sleeping is 1/60th of death. Even before my feet touched the ground, I washed my hands when I came out of the bathroom and I made a blessing. I washed my hands before I ate bread. A lot of it had to do with kind of ritual purity. And I'm just wondering why it isn't. It almost sounds like a kind of a ritual or almost, we consider people that wash their hands over and over again. It's almost a neurosis sometimes. You get that. I don't understand why it hasn't transferred more in a more positive way. I guess I'm kind of just talking out loud here, and I'm wondering what your impression was. Have we lived up to the potential of the power of water?
So I'm going to tell you something interesting. About 6 or 7 years ago, there was a Reform rabbi. Her name was Rabbi Sarah Luria. She was a Reform rabbi in Brooklyn. And she had this idea to train mikvah facilitators, and they would help people who wanted to go to the mikvah at critical moments in their life, not religious moments. Someone who, God forbid, was diagnosed with cancer and they had to start chemotherapy, or they finished chemotherapy, or they had a baby, or they just got divorced, or their child is getting married, whatever, at critical moments, life cycle kinds of moments. And she trained a whole group of these facilitators, and she somehow got, connected them with these people. And, there could be 20 people a month who go to the mikvah with these people. And you talk about whether we lived up to the potential. Maybe the answer is that we did live up to the potential, because look at things like this. This project, Emersion NYC, was now taken over by the JCC in Manhattan. And it's something that, that's a perfect place for it, because they can publicize it. So, it's a kind of a way of publicizing mikvah, of trying to get more people to appreciate the value of water.
I just so love what you've introduced, and your takeaway is maybe we have lived up to the potential. My takeaway is here's a woman and a movement that show us the potential, because just as I said before, that every Jewish community had a Beit Knesset, had a Gemach, and had a mikveh, and I said that from the perspective of, and that means that those institutions were there for people. Literally, as you were saying, at every moment in their life, at every segue, at every milestone in their life, whether it was the need for prayer, whether it was the need for financial support, or whether it was the need for that mikveh. And what my argument is tonight, and you can see it in the notes, is that what the rabbis did was they kind of made a dividing line. One of the definitions of an Am Haaretz is someone who is eating, who does not eat non-sacred food in a state of ritual purity. They created this purity as a dividing line. The Essenes left the rest of the Jewish community and created something that was based on multiple immersions and purities, and John the Baptist came right out of that and all that. And my argument is that in a sense they politicized this purity code and this sense of when you have to wash and when you have to dip, so to speak. And in a sense, they robbed us of being able to use water. I have to say, I once went on one of those Shabbatot that my wife is away, and I said, okay, I'll go to the beach. And it was the Forum congregation that was having their Kabbalat Shabbat. And not only did they have it at the beach, but I saw people started walking over to the surf. And I almost felt like, what is this? Is this the rivers of Jordan that we're at? It felt like it was it was beautiful. I went with them, but I just have this core kind of feeling that what this woman that you describe is doing has to be successful, that we have to be able to re-engage with this ability to use the power of water. I love on a Friday to dip in my pool and just dunk in the water, whether it's Mayim Chaimim or it has a little bit of chlorine in it.
I want to tell you that is your mikveh. Hasidim go to the mikveh and you go to your swimming pool. That's just as good.
But the point is, there is something about that rebirth and that embryonic fluids and whatever. And I think that's what I connected to this year when I read this parsha and I saw the emphasis on the water. And it was crying out to us. I mean, I have to say, and there were pictures in the Sephira notes of a church that I went to that they excavated, a baptism thing that looked just like a mikveh to me. I have pictures of mikvahs that they've uncovered in Israel that are 2,000 years old. This is something that we should definitely reconnect to, and it should be available to all of the Jewish people. And that's what my takeaway was.
That is a great takeaway. This was a really important session. Enjoy your dunk in your pool mikveh tomorrow. Enjoy your Kabbalat Shabbat. We'll enjoy. Sag Harbor is not actually on the ocean, but we will enjoy the water as well. And I look forward to next week. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Enjoy a great Shabbat and a great week. Be well, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom to you. All the best.